We got to increase that to at least 30 seconds. This sounds abrupt.
Way to do.
All right.
Where did we go? I saw us on YouTube, and now I don't see us on YouTube. Oh, there we are.
Yeah,
okay.
we're here. You just got to give about 7 to 15 seconds.
Got it.
Anyway, folks, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever the heck in the world you are. It is V the Guerrilla, and I'm here with my main man, Veles, as well as Cowboy, working the airways, making sure this broadcast is coming out crispy and clean. You know what I mean? We keep it on the scene. You can find us all at roguenews.com. Check us out at Rogue News on X. And also, again, guys, you know, the upcoming changes that are happening here as ESW is emerging. We will have our app out very soon. We're very excited about it. And with that being said, good morning, gentlemen. What are you guys, how are you guys doing? And there's so many things happening as well. So I guess first let me ask how you guys are doing this morning.
I'm good.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Well, fellas,
you guys have been nailing it all week.
Yeah, man. We've been back in full effect, brother. Back in full effect. Fellas, there's lots of things going on. People want to hear your synopsis, your intel dump on everything. The debrief to begin. So take us where angels fear to tread, my friend. Take us where angels fear to tread. Go ahead, fellas.
Thank you, my friend. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the ships at sea, and welcome to Friday, the 27th of June. And I've got my two brothers in arms sitting on the AWACS, keeping an eye on everything. So let's jump into it, folks. First item in the appetizer section is Ukraine. My thanks to Tom Luanko for this one. I don't know how many of you caught this, but Ukraine recently defaulted on their debt. Who holds that debt other than Europe? Yes, that would be London.
Yep.
But please keep watching the video game in the Levant and Tehran. The pattern. Following topic has been covered by many people in the alternative community over the years. Inclusive of finger pointing around a particular pattern was the desire of Israel. Others saying the London Corporation, others saying neocons, and the list goes on. Immediately following the events of 9/11 in 2001, a plan was either expanded or developed at the U.S. Pentagon. One of the architects of that plan was the famous Donald Rumsfeld, though I can assure you it was on the books long before Don added his thoughts in the margins of the paper. The plan being several countries in the Middle East either needed to be overthrown by revolution or military action. Those countries included, in order, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. So how are we doing roughly 24 years later? And remember, folks, the world's elites always play the long game. Iraq was invaded in 2003, and that order came with a free French fry in the form of Afghanistan. Syria, years of civil war culminating in the fall of the Assad family in 2024. Lebanon, pick a year in 24 where that country has known stability. That is when warehouse explosions are not putting a new front end on the country, and the people in California are wondering if there's an earthquake. Libya was overthrown in 2011 after 40 years of Muammar Gaddafi's rule. Somalia, well, when has Somalia not been a failed state? Sudan, always off balance. Iran will probably fall or undergo a major reordering in 2025. The point being, when there's a long-term plan in play, in one form or another, it will be achieved. To all of us, 24 years seems like a long time. To the people we live under, that's just how things are. Multiplayer games, noting my comments about patterns, there's a lot, and I mean a lot, to various narratives we've been flooded with the last few weeks concerning Iran and Israel's conflict. That's the way of things. Within that avalanche of narratives, opinions, and disinformation, let me offer you the following. Are, or were there, cells, if you will, of loyal activists for Iran in the United States? Well, technically, yes. Quite a few were in the Detroit and Toledo areas, and I've mentioned this previously on other programs. I personally know an FBI agent who was assigned to monitor those groups. Were they well organized? Well, kind of. Candidly, I think if they were left alone, they just wanted to work at their jobs and watch American Idol during their evenings. Who does have extensive networks of operations across the U.S. and every aspect of American business, academia, and government? Well, that would be our friends in the Levant. So if someone wanted to launch a wave of attacks across the United States to force the U.S. into action, who was more able to do that and, importantly, had a motive? But then what occurred? The United States moved first and in a dramatic demonstration of capability did not launch B-2 bombers from Diego Garcia or other locations, but pulled a Colonel Boyd-like move and attacked from a different direction. The bombers were sent from Missouri. They hit their targets and returned to Missouri. That may not sound like a big deal, folks, but in military science, that's quite impressive. My point? Would our ally in the Levant attack us domestically to achieve their aims? I'm not even going to answer that. However, for perspective, consideration in academic circles, the following is no longer even debated. British intelligence knew the exact day and time the U.S. would be hit at Pearl Harbor in 1941, and they did nothing. As the old saying goes, with friends like these, who needs enemies? In all seriousness, though, this is why what I just said is the sort of thing in the back pages of books or 4chan postings. If you told the public this stuff, they couldn't handle yet another revelation about the world in which we live. By the way, while our attention in this magic trick is occupied with the Middle East, media attacks against an easy target in the White House, and a photo op with NATO, what are you not noticing? Beyond Ukraine defaulting on debt, what's going on with Japan's central bank right now, my friends? How are things in Argentina and Brazil? What's the commodities situation in Chile or Peru? Canada appears to have fizzled out with its counterattack against the United States. Would that be because Western provinces in Canada are reminding Toronto, you need us more than we need you? What is the sit-rep with the national debt in Italy, France, Portugal, and Germany right now? Maybe you might want to investigate those things. Oh, why do you think NATO, who hates Donald, or more accurately, the people backing him, why NATO had that photo op? Because NATO countries cannot afford their promised increases in defense spending that they've been talking about? So how would they rearm or at least have the resources they need? Well, if the United States is nice and promises them arms in a pinch or sells them at reduced rates, that might work out. Ergo, the photo op. Plus, as far as the whole Iran-Israel thing is concerned, remember, in any conflict, there are always two winners: international banking and arms dealers. Iran. For history fans, just a few reminders. Western powers overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh in a coup in 1953 in Iran. The returning Shah signed over 40% of Iran's oil fields to U.S. companies, although that technically was American and British oil companies. What did Mossadegh do? The same thing as several leaders who experienced similar outcomes, including Allende in Chile in 1973, Jaime Roldos, the president of Ecuador, who died in a plane crash in the spring of '81, and Omar Torrijos, the head of Panama in the summer of '81. They wanted more of their national wealth spent on their own citizens rather than companies who controlled those countries. A fact I remember well being in Peru in August of 2000 when Alberto Fujimori was shown the door. But in his case, it was prison with no visitors rather than a plane crash. By the way, I will point out, 1981 was a hell of a year for private contractors, if you get my meaning. So anyway, back to Iran. So the Shah's family led the country until 1941 when the Western powers kicked out one Shah and replaced him with his son. Then Mossadegh became prime minister and he was kicked out in 53. Then the Shah and the family ruled Iran until 79 when the Ayatollah took power in another coup. Many have felt the Soviet Union was involved in the Ayatollah taking power in 79. Ironically, that's disinformation. It was Europe, dare one say Davos, who forced the Shah from power and put the Ayatollah in power. But who in Europe was the real power in Iran? Ironically, it was Germany, who you could argue was the caretaker on behalf of Davos. Iran for decades was loaded with German companies operating plants there and direct flights to Germany several times a day. Now we're going to replace Iran's government yet again. I wonder if the Persian community in California, among other U.S. states, are packing their bags in anticipation of going home and a new Shah being put in power. As usual, no one has asked the people of Iran what they want. Property for sale, cheap. Noting what I just said, I just provided Western powers have put a member of the Shah's family in power or back in power. The last time it only cost the country 40% of their oil fields to U.S. and British companies. In 2009, during the Iranian Green Revolution, anyone remember that one? I found myself once again on the scene. But I wasn't in Iran. I was in Boston. Why does that matter? While walking with my kids, we came across university protesters carrying green flags or banners and the current flag of Iran, demonstrating against yet another crackdown in Iran, even if Iran was being manipulated again by the West via the Green Movement. Many of the protesters were of Middle East background, and I assume many were of Iranian background or descent. As they quietly came around the corner, another large group approached them. This group was also holding green banners, but they also held Iran's flag with a lion in the center. These protesters being older and almost entirely of Middle East individuals, and no doubt all of Iranian background. The flag they carried, with a lion, was the flag of Iran during the time of the Shah. Thank you for the image, boys. I placed my hand on my daughter's shoulder and whispered, "You're watching history before your eyes," and told my kids not to say a word. Both groups must have looked at each other for more than a minute in silence. It seemed to me like that moment lasted a lifetime. It still gives me a cold chill remembering that day. Two groups of Iranians separated by decades and both committed to their homeland, but split between expatriate Iranians and those on visas attending school in the U.S. Both who loved their homeland and what was happening there, yet trying to come to terms with their past as much as their future. In that moment, I remembered a similar scene, something more aligned with my own ethnic background. Aged white Russian men, most of whom who would be dead in 2 to 3 years, handing back the Imperial Academy flags to the new cadets of the newly established military schools in Russia in the 1990s. You have to recall, around the time those flags were returned, most of the Tsar and his family and loyal staff who were executed were being buried in the crypts at Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg in 1998. They and their families took those flags from those academies when they fled Russia in 1917. As dying old men, they returned to give those flags to the lead cadets at each school, among many things signifying the legitimacy of the academies again to all Russians and the continuation of their social impact in the country. In remarks made by those white Russian men to those cadets, they said words to the effect, "Brothers, we've been killing each other for too long. We have to focus on rebuilding Russia," unquote. I thought the same thing as the two Iranian groups merged that day in 2009 and marched silently through Boston. In Politico this week, along with other publications, the obvious has been said. Is it time for Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah, to return? Would such an idea have support in Iran, many analysts wonder. Reza is speaking often of the idea of him returning to Iran, and that certainly isn't occurring in a vacuum. My own 2 cents on the topic is this. Russia has toyed with the idea of establishing a czar-like role in the country as a moral and social figurehead. If not a czar, perhaps a form of regent overseeing the Duma, and particularly someone of aristocratic or if not Romanov background. Cambodia did something similar in 1993 when they restored the monarchy. In that country's case, to bring a form of social order who would not be beholden to either of the political sides and is solely looking out for the people. In my opinion, the role of Reza, that is the type of role he should have, not that of Shah, but we will see. Switching back to the United States, the Diddy trial. Anyone notice the prosecutors dropped several charges against Diddy this week? Perhaps not with the fears of nuclear war. A war who would occur in a conflict where all sides have been telling each other when they're attacking and what they're attacking. To paraphrase the Iraqi public relations guy in 2003, we're roasting their stomachs in hell. Back to Diddy. As of today's program, a portion of the charges against Diddy were dropped by prosecutors. That's a strange time to make that legal adjustment. I'm not alone in this, but I gave you specifics a couple of weeks ago. When you look carefully at the legal charges brought against him versus the evidence introduced, no one is seriously trying to convict him. It's theater, but for a purpose. As we often point out, it's another scene out of the movie Under the Silver Lake. We know there's a message in the song. We may even know the message, but we don't know for whom it's intended. Was this to remind certain elites they could be brought down if needed? Was this to threaten Diddy's handlers? Was it to see if Diddy would break and cut some sort of deal? Who knows? Will he be convicted of anything? Probably not. By the way, have any of you not watched Under the Silver Lake at this point? Venice, Italy. Full disclosure, I have traveled to Venice in my lifetime. That doesn't mean it and its history is nothing less than a ritualistic globalist hellscape of a place if you truly know that town's background. That said, there are very specific reasons why Jeff Bezos and his plastic fiancée are getting married in Venice and during the summer. Though the locals in that city have a sense of humor, they unfurled a huge banner you can see from the air who says, if you can rent the city of Venice for your wedding, you can afford to pay more taxes. Even the oppressed have a sense of humor. Refueling aircraft. First things, folks, whenever something appears in heavy coverage on places like Twitter, aka X, with FAA flight patterns and similar, you need to ask why. There are strange military flights all the time, and they do actually file flight plans. Yet when suddenly that content appears with heavy coverage, I have to ask why. Why would anyone want such heavy coverage of a supposedly semi-secret military operation? Really? That's a message, folks, or a distraction, or both. I covered on Discord all the various things around those flights, including the fact that if you take the fuel tanks out of those planes, you essentially have a large cargo plane, which then begs the question, cargo for what? Pre-positioning in case we had more options lined up with Iran if we needed them? With hindsight, some of them were used to keep the B-2s fueled from Missouri to Iran and back. Equally, it could have led to confusion about the launch point of the planes, whether Diego Garcia or another location. Remember, though, the confusion that was intended by so much coverage about those planes was not just for Iran. It was for everyone globally, because that military action was a message to everyone about the U.S.'s capabilities. Moving to Minnesota, we have Gladio-like resources in the continental United States, my friends. Just ask John F. Kennedy in Dallas in 1963. For that matter, recall the famous statement by Colin Powell. And I don't mean Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. I'm talking about him publicly telling or privately telling President Bush, and it came out publicly later during 9/11, do not send assassination squads across the United States to take out domestic enemies. You cannot achieve something like that unless you already had those resources. So back to Minnesota. What's the story on the back page of the news about those shootings? That the woman who was killed, the elected representative who was killed, had voted against health benefits for foreign nationals in that state. So listen carefully. How many demonstrations are planned for July 4th? I'm dead serious. Go look at the internet and the groups planning those. Who's to say someone else does not accidentally fall on a bullet come July 4th? Were the shootings in Minnesota just the beginning, or a warning to others, or both? They're gearing up for July 4th, folks. How much of that and of what we will see. To paraphrase a famous line from the radio show Coast to Coast, stay out of the cities. Also, I cannot help but be amused, folks, by the narrative that is trying to get some traction out on the internet, pointing out that, quote unquote, the shooter was a pro-Donald Trump supporter. And as I often say, this has nothing to do with either of the political parties. Where I'm going with this is the guy was working for the governor of Minnesota who's left of left. How in the heck and why would he be a Donald Trump supporter? Shots. Keep in mind what we're not paying attention to with all this coverage of Iran and Israel, such as further hearings about damage caused by the inoculations. Of course, even with peer-reviewed articles on that topic and the FDA's own updated warning statements recently, there's a segment of folks who just cannot be unplugged from the matrix. They simply cannot internalize how rigged the system is and still believe mom and dad are still picking them up after school. I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just making a point. Plus, we also have continued solar activity going on worth keeping an eye on. Drones. There's been a ton of technical innovations in drone technology announced just this month. Things like their ability to operate independently or less frequently with human control. Their ability also to operate effectively in swarms. Do not forget either, just like military planes, you can attach pods to drones with limitless capabilities possible with each of those pods. Again, a good time to become familiar with the FAA or amateur websites as large police support drones must file flight plans. We have enough 737s already hitting things. So when demonstrations occur, how many drones are flying in the haze with a light blue paint scheme and taking down everyone's cell phone data? Because they can, folks. They've had that tech for decades. And I've already had some folks who were nice enough to send me, and it's on the FAA website and similar, data about drones flying over certain demonstrations that occurred a couple of weeks ago. Last year's technology, not saying this in a literal sense, but there is truth to this, and in your guts, you know I'm right. We're fast approaching a point at which military gear has nowhere near the value in the military sense it once did. If I take out your hospitals, food warehouses, and then your power grid, why does how many tanks you have even matter? However, Europe keeps talking, keyword, about all this military spending they want. Please note what I said earlier. It's already shifted to AI, data centers, and cyber warfare. Cyber warfare was there previously, but it's gone full bore now. Now more than ever is a good time to remind us all, It's always good to have 30 days worth of stuff on hand in case you need it. USAID, and this is a Rogue exclusive. We recently said on a Rogue program, one of the things misunderstood about the USAID organization is the following. A predecessor organization to USAID was how Western money was laundered to create the Gladio assets across Europe starting in the late 1940s. In contemporary time, we've been filled with stories, keyword, stories, about how various waste exists across the US government and the Doge organization is hunting it down. Okay, but to my knowledge, there's not a lot of reports with specifics. We've heard statements made, there's been some PowerPoint images, but that's about it. Various budget hawks have said for all the savings from Doge, the new budget is still solidly keeping the United States in red ink on our balance sheets. So what gives? Well, leveraging Freakonomics like way, this is the exclusive. Remember when Russia invaded Ukraine and among various military targets, they seized the various U.S. paid-for biolabs in that country, especially along the border between Russia and Ukraine? The Russians also did something else. They had Spetsnaz teams move swiftly to seize certain banks. They weren't looking for bars of gold. Think of the rumor about the Russians breaking into the evidence locker in Florida to grab the Epstein blackmail films that were stored there. Supposedly, the Russians seized those banks while they were still connected to various networks before the connectivity was shut off. Of course, their own preparations ensured the Russians knew exactly what they were looking for once they got inside those banks. Evidently, they seized hard copies, and especially electronic copies, of all the laundering transfers of money through Ukraine's banks. Everything from American politicians to European politicians to the occasional South American drug family. What else theoretically would the Russians have acquired? They would have acquired the USAID financial transfers. So then, is the real reason why so much attention was thrust on USAID via Doge in the media, which also, by the way, has the danger of revealing a lot of things no one wants disclosed, was the real reason why Doge and all the attention on USAID took place was to justify shutting down USAID, shutting it down because it's now compromised, and a new agency just like it, or an existing one, will now resume the same financial laundering to fund overthrows or God knows what. Think about it. Long game. With all these various data points, we need to remember something we often say here on Rogue, and it's the most important thing that we always say. What is the long game? Note what I said at the opening about Iran and all the affected countries in the Middle East and North Africa the last 24 years. Beyond the wars and rumors of wars, is it the digital economy? Is it new inoculations, something about AI we've not discovered, or something astronomical or astrological who will authorize certain moves? That's where we have to continue to keep our focus. And ironically, based on the image on your screens right now from the WHO, I actually have a segment called New Boss, Same as the Old Boss. Now into the main course, Children in the Shadows. In early 2016, there was a large FBI bust of people trafficking kids. Several hundred kids were released who had been trafficked for everything from labor to sex. Recently, the government wrapped up Operation Soteria, where 109 children were rescued and 244 adults were arrested for trafficking and related. Soteria, by the way, is a Greek reference for a goddess who provides safety, salvation, and deliverance from harm. A notable item from this topic I've raised often. When all those federal employees and contractors were moving kids around America a couple of years ago, it was to people identified as family or approved sponsors. The U.S. government has discovered many of those people were improperly vetted, and the children were delivered to people who exploited them. The next data point has been one of considerable debate in regards to the term missing, quote unquote. Depending on the month, around 300,000 kids have not appeared for immigration court hearings. Some describe that as kids being missing, while others describe it as a missed court date, but not technically unknown. Whether it's 30,000 or 300,000, that's a lot of kids, where the knowledge of location is in doubt. Equally, truth be told, the number of missing or lost in the system stretch across 2 presidential administrations. These are not all purely federal-related investigations either, as the state of Florida just concluded what they called Operation Dragonfly, who rescued 60 kids with the help of the U.S. Marshal Service. So why am I raising this topic? Well, for Freakonomic-like reasons again. for those of you who know that those books or that practice. First, when Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped in 2002 and then found 9 months later, we had considerable media coverage. Part of that was due to her parents not letting the story die in the news and the influence of the Mormon community. Yet each year, hundreds of kids are rescued, and we have no significant media coverage other than law enforcement agencies announcing the results of investigation. What's the old saying? Single death is a tragedy and 1,000 is a statistic. However, that analogy doesn't fly. There is and has been a continuous effort to move such stories, or data if you will, to the back page of the news and the memory hole as quickly as possible. At least that's my opinion. Where are the public interest stories or local or national media about the life stories of these rescued kids? Recalling the coverage I provided previously about how extensive the Franklin scandal was and the immense effort to cover that up. Second, noting Elizabeth Smart among other such cases, there were interviews and books about her experiences and that of other high-profile cases, including the women up in Cleveland. However, we're talking about hundreds of kids a year being rescued, yet no human interest stories, no graphic from the Visual Capitalist website about the top 10 states for trafficking activity, no special interest commentary and news stories by The View or Good Morning America, just crickets. Why is that? Third, volume and span. This is a lot of volume of kids and young adults, and the extensiveness of it has gone on for decades, yet neither political party has made it an item on their party platforms to address. No social marches regularly taking place to address it, no Silicon Valley or Hollywood media celebrities or billionaires regularly raising fuss on the topic, just silence. Fourth, many of the same agencies who periodically break up these trafficking networks seem to avoid what many analysts and a handful of aid organizations all uniformly agree upon. Interdict the flow of funds to the people who profit from this. Seems like those agencies could get some great press if they really drove hard on uses and sources of cash by traffickers. Further, that weakness has been known for decades and could be leveraged, but for some reason no one seems to be able or allowed to pursue it. Yet God help you if you're a landscaper going across the border to Mexico with 10 grand to buy plants for your business. The feds will be on you in milliseconds. Fifth item. These are the same federal agencies who've never prosecuted anyone for utilizing the services of Jeff Epstein, Jean-Luc Brunel, or Peter Nygaard. Isn't that strange? New boss, same as the old boss. Noted for the lyrics of a Who song, Won't Get Fooled Again. Some of you may have noticed in theater and social direction going on in New York's city mayoral race, Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic Socialist candidate, is doing well. V dug into this topic in detail on his program yesterday, and I had the same problem, V, in almost calling him Zohan.
I keep calling him the Great Zohan.
So,
for that movie, Don't Mess with the Zohan or something like that.
Don't mess with the Zohan.
Yeah.
Pundits are saying this is a response by the left to populist leaders like the Donald. That would be true if the system wasn't controlled to the degree that it is. But sure, okay. National Socialists, Democratic Socialists, or my personal favorite, Christian Socialist parties and candidates. Congratulations, New York. You've become the politics of Greece. Of course, this is just the elites messing with us, and there's a reason a complete nobody suddenly showed up in the political sphere. There was a statement made by political analysts in the 1990s worth considering. They said in the 1970s no one thought the state of Texas would be anything but a Democratic stronghold, and California would never be so crazy as to not be Republican. Well, things have shifted. Of course, these shifts have little to do with the supposed political party influence in those states. It's just window dressing for the public. If you want to live off social services, go move to Massachusetts, California, or Wisconsin, among others. You want to build a business and not get taxed to death? Move to Florida, Tennessee, or Texas. On a related note, Murkowski of Alaska is talking like they're switching to the Democratic Party. Of course, Murkowski has always been a Democrat in their actions. This is how they do it. When the scales start moving too much in any one direction, those folks on the periphery switch parties, and that goes for both sides, because that was always the intention. Who cares? Because who's really focused on what's best for those states, even though each state out there is basically run by a handful of families? We've covered on Rogue quite a bit lately who really runs California. In the end, are the rumors true New York is moving purple? Are the rumors true there's a moderate pushback who's continuing to occur in California? Is it true the blue policies in Colorado have caused big money people to move their assets and interests to other states? Well, I shared with you all my experiences within the past year at resorts in Wyoming and Montana, where I encountered not just Californians who were never going to move back to California and weren't happy about it either, but an exodus of people from Colorado and Minnesota. And this is another pseudo rogue exclusive and dovetailing off V's work yesterday. It's Balkanization, folks. And that's what V was talking about yesterday and its dangers to the United States. Let me boil it down a little further. This is what's happening, truly. And it's why you're seeing V and I talking about this. To paraphrase Lieutenant Colonel Murray, at the height of the coup, the true powers out there became aware through subtle observation of the public people were organizing. They became aware of the public, to paraphrase Erwin Rommel, the Americans are learning how to fight, when he was told how well his forces had prevailed over the U.S. Army in North Africa. The powers that be became aware the public was learning how to use the courts, due process, appeals, depositions, and individual rights under the law. Well, we can't have that, so they took the pressure off in places where it was politically feasible. Red states in the Midwest, southern states, and Florida, along with Texas. Then activist New Yorkers and Californians lost their minds seeing people walking around not distancing themselves 6 feet and unmasked. The sheer horror. Then even California and New York unchained their citizens. Remember what occurred later, right before the election? The major universities in the U.S. aligned with the London Corporation had major protests, just like the city protests years before, because what? We had ready-made Gladio assets who were stood up and stood down as needed. So this is the latest chapter, folks. V said it yesterday, and I'll qualify a bit further. It's about the cities. Literally, it's about the cities. The land of the United States, for the most part, is red in its orientation. The cities are blue. There's a lot of reasons for the latter. We're not going to get into that today. The policies pursued by many cities are driving out the very tax base they need to maintain these socialist-like policies, noting the mayoral race in New York right now. As the old saying goes, college students love socialism and their professors do too, and neither of them have ever lived under it. Ask graduating college students in France their thoughts on that country's guaranteed jobs situation now that the French economy is buckling. Have you noted previously states like Illinois and California will hit you with taxes if you try to leave those states, and that's true. That's not because those states need it as much as their major cities do. You must keep those social programs running one way or another. Poor Governor Gavin Newsom, he switched his position so many times to try and keep up with all of this. The citizens of California should just send him boxes of waffle mix. Stay tuned to the events who may occur around July 4th this summer, because this is only the beginning. You will fight this war with our lands from the north and oppose it from our lands in the south, my son. We have to be practical. So said Robert the Bruce's father during the William Wallace uprisings in Scotland. So say we all. Economic evolution. For those of us who've been around a while, we've seen a lot. Especially in my case, when I've worked in as many commercial industries, government agencies, and academic institutions as I have. We tend to notice patterns, and of course, depending on the source, academics and others will tell you, well, that's just coincidence. It's like babies being born in higher percentages during a full moon. Scientists will tell you there's no truth to that. But if you speak to nurses, they have a completely different view, and they ought to know. Though I'll tell my academic colleagues what I'm about to say is provable for several reasons. This being the never-ending drive to cut cost, simply to cut cost. The larger the organization, especially if publicly traded, the greater the degree of never-ending cost-cutting. The reasons? Several, not the least of which larger corporations' boards are heavily influenced by private equity. As many of you know, I worked with and for one of the bigger private equity outfits out there. They don't care if the company goes under, they want their money. Therefore, most senior executives' compensation is based on cost-cutting as well. So when you hear words like innovation, market penetration, and similar buzzwords, that means growth and cost-cutting. Yes, there are costs who should be cut, but that doesn't mean management's sole existence should be cost-cutting. This is how AI is being sold in many respects to senior executive leaders. It'll help you slash massive costs from your organizations. Does AI have its place? Yes, but it's not manna from heaven. And as I said at the opening, I've seen these things before. This goes back to the justifications for the personal computer, or PC, in the late 1980s, to the growth in large IT networks in the 1990s, to industry methodologies requiring certifications of your staff, to offshoring in the early 2000s, and the list goes on. Behind closed doors, the main reason for adoption was always about cost. Sure, language like speed of development and response, reorienting corporate funds for better use, and a host of other phrases was used. This is why diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether you believe in it or not, never stood a chance, because it creates cost. It doesn't remove it. It's not about whether it's good or bad. It was a political tool who was used and has been discarded. Where I'm taking you with this is the combined topic of AI data centers and power grid buildouts. To begin with, no matter how much money AI and related is supposed, quote unquote, to save, there will still be some board of directors out there screaming, cut more cost, in part because their compensation agreements are based on it, and it's more than 50% of private equity's focus. Ergo, if AI continues down this road, it will increasingly be directed or designed to specifically eliminate jobs. Again, we've been here before. Why hire one American with kids who jacks up your healthcare costs and might get moody in the workplace when you can replace them easily with people from India, Mexico, the Philippines, or China? That was the early 2000s, and the damage, dare one say slaughter, was mind-boggling. I was there, I know. Candidly, I don't think anyone has really performed deep academic study into what occurred in those years. If they did, their academic departments would push back against that work due to how much money they take from those same companies. It's like the old joke about 90% of scientists agree with the following because that's how they're funded. Equally, my own experiences at General Electric under Jack Welch come to mind. Constant drives to remove cost from these deployments will hit all three key areas of AI software data centers and the power grid, though in the case of the latter, that may be buffered by a variety of other power needs across the United States who are not decreasing. When key software came out in the late 1980s through 1990s, it always led to consolidation. Eventually, you were only using Microsoft Office tools and goodbye IBM and similar Office products. Then the remaining firms sold you their services in bulk because it had become commoditized. And we've talked often on Rogue about, in economic models, this fear, understandably, about what happens when anything you do becomes commoditized. Even today, Microsoft has a battle on its hands with Google, taking it one step further with their integrated suite of web-based tools. In the telecom industry, we had a ton of languages our gear used. We called them protocols. But in the end, it boiled down to Cisco and VMware, among others. Again, it consolidated. So let me offer you some future predictions. Equally, it's an investment opportunity, although we are not dispensing investment advice, as we always say. But you may want to research what I'm saying for some investment options. Given 30 plus years when it comes to products and changes like AI in industry, I believe this can only end one way. Further, it will occur very quickly given the speed at which these things take place in the economy and in development, who are hyper fast versus the 90s. Ready? We will eventually see perhaps two AI products out there who are the engines behind other AI tools, or the back end, if you will. This is not the right way to describe it, but think of it as an operating system for AI systems. Today we have ChatGPT, Grok, Claude, who by the way is one of my favorites, and a host of other tools who specialize in text, images, or industry-specific tasks. That's all agnostic, folks. It's really about what's on the back end, or as they used to say about why Google's products were so good. It's about the math engines that they used to drive that software. This is why I think the real battle, or where the real battle is, with what the Chinese developed in the prior year. That's why people who were in the know really freaked out by the degree of change that product release represented. Post-year 2000, I was involved in massive data consolidation, or data center consolidations for major companies. It's another one of the many jobs where I didn't stay long. A major company would have 10 data centers nationally and consolidate down to 2. Everyone else was laid off and the real estate was sold. What occurred later? The consolidation should not have been that massive, but the vice presidents all got their bonus, so who cares? Further, here on Rogue, we've already covered 2 very critical changes who could upset this entire apple cart. AI is just getting started. That being the integer change, who could be made to the processor chips and data centers, who could cut costs, or cut power use by more than 90%. As I often say, that's not speculation. It's been tested repeatedly and it works. The second item was last week's coverage of reversible computing, who reduces heat in data storage and appears to work more effectively in AI environments. From AI application consolidation to data center consolidation, we've been here before. Let me sprinkle in something else. Long, long ago, a group of high school students took a bunch of Apple II computers and networked them on the floor of their high school gym. They also had a bunch of fans running due to all the heat the things were producing. What happened? Sparing you a bunch of detail about how they did it, they created an inter-networked series of computers who could outperform a Cray supercomputer, the kind of computers that are used by NASA or the Department of Energy and other super users to study everything from curvatures of things you move into space, or in the case of the Department of Energy, basically nuclear bomb testing. The good people at Cray and simpler companies were officially angry. Privately, they were throwing up in the bathroom. I can also assure you the folks in the Department of Defense and similar were quite concerned once that little experiment became public, because then how long until China or the Soviet Union created their own poor man's supercomputers? We're fast approaching, in my opinion, a super or supra artificial intelligence platform. What Amazon Web Services is to software as a service, where you are billed on a usage basis and you own nothing. We've heard that before. I envision a future supra AI system. Think of apps on a phone. Your AI tools become highly customizable based on what you need and your technical expertise, but yet everyone runs their tools through Mother's Kitchen to perform their calculations. The implications of this are vastly different from the 1980s through the 2000s. If we're not careful, we're marching toward a higher level of slavery by the world's elites. But to quote Babylon 5, the avalanche has already started. It's too late for the pebbles to vote. I yield the floor.
Very well said, man. Very well said. Great show. Cowboy, do you want to say anything?
I'm good. That was amazing.
Yeah. And as with all of Veles' shows, I recommend all of you guys to go back and listen to it again. Take notes and have your dark roast ready. And with that being said, folks, we're at the end of the stream. Thank you all for listening. Have an amazing weekend. Enjoy your weekend. And
yes.
We'll be back Monday. Take it away, Cowboy.